By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. The meeting is also now being live streamed. Thank you.
Thank you again. This is Mary Soderberg. I would like to call to order the committee meeting of the Finance and Member Services Committee. May we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Senator DeSanto, he's here, but he's out of the room, so we'll circle back to him. Chairman Philman?
Here.
Representative Frankel?
Here.
Committee Chair Soderberg?
Here.
Secretary Vague?
Here.
Jim Bloom? Okay, thank you.
All right.
Can we just mark Senator DeSanto present when he comes back in? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, the senator just stepped out of the room momentarily. All right. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes from the June 8th meeting.
So moved.
Okay. And everyone in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. There is no old business for us to review, and our first order of new business is a special presentation on the investment rate of return. We have our consultants from Korn Ferry and Callan here today to do a presentation for the committee. Coming up is Chris Seitz of Korn Ferry, and Tom Schingler and Jay Kuffler of Callan.
If anybody needs a paper copy, we just brought 8, so if anybody would prefer to have that, I can pass that out.
I am sure many people would like a copy.
And the document that we'll be going over is contained in tab 5A of Board Docs.
And we fixed it. So let's mark revise on this because you still have just the old. So we'll ask Susie to add it or send it to Rose. Say,
Okay.
over 2 years, put it right next to it. It's called revised. You got a thing to do? We'll take care of it.
Yeah,
So,
I've got a copy.
good
Does
morning.
anybody else need a copy of the hard copy?
Good morning, and it's great to see everyone in person again. So today we're going to recap a lot of the information that we covered during the June committee meeting with the ultimate goal of providing a recommended assumed rate of return and investment rate of return for the December 31, 2021 actuarial valuation. So that's what will be used as the basis to set the employer contribution rates beginning July 1 of 2022. So the current fiscal year, obviously underway, has already been set. This is looking forward to the next fiscal year. So again, the documents are contained in tab 5A on Board Docs. And if we can move to slide 2. So we're going to go through a background and also some economic environment and conditions. Again, mainly a recap of information that we covered in June. We tried to kind of be complete and have a complete document here for reference, but we'll try to move through this rather quickly. And then what's new to this meeting is Section 3, the effects on plan funding. So that's where we'll really look at the effects on the budgeted contribution, the effects on funded ratio, the size of the unfunded liability, both for the upcoming fiscal year and then projected into the future. So I'm going to start off. I'm Chris Seitz with Korn Ferry. We serve as the actuarial advisors for SERS. And then also here today are Jay and Tom from Callan, and we'll be turning over to them to cover some of the economic considerations as well. If we jump forward to page 4, we'll see, again, this investment return assumption that we're discussing today is specific to the actuarial valuation. Okay, this is an assumption that is long-term in nature. so that when we are estimating the value of the benefits that will be paid from CSRS, we are discounting them back and reflecting the expected long-term investment performance that will be achieved. We review this every year so that we can always make sure we're keeping up to date with what's actually happening. So we're projecting in the future, we have this assumption, we're reviewing what our expectations are. But again, with each valuation, we are always recognizing what has actually happened in the markets. We're always kind of truing up as we go and adjusting as we go. If we move to page 5, the purpose, again, is to set what is referred to as the actuarially determined contribution that we'll refer to as ADC, and that is what we know as the employer contribution rates. So is the recommended contribution amount such that the benefits will be funded, assets will be available to pay benefits when due to members, and so that we can create a reasonably stable and reasonably predictable pattern of contributions so that budgeting is affected. And again, as changes happen, we understand what the trend is and are able to adjust for that. If we move to page 6, the components of the investment return really are broken down between a underlying assumption related to future inflation, so general increase in the price of goods, and then above that, what we expect to earn that we refer to as real returns. So our investment performance that's expected to return value above and beyond what that general inflation is. And we do want to focus on both of these components today because they're important as far as what they contribute, and they're also important because they have a different effect on the funded status of the plan and the contribution needs of the plan. So we'll be able to see the effects of that when we get to the results. If we move to page 7. So column A provides the current assumptions that were used for the December 31, 2020 actuarial valuation that set the employer contribution rates for the current fiscal year. And if there were no change, these would be the assumptions that would also be used for the upcoming valuation as well. So the assumed rate of return, the investment return rate, the bolded kind of bottom line final number is 7%. And that is made up of an inflation assumption of 2.5% long-term expected inflation, plus above that 4.5% real return expectation. We can focus on column C because of the motion from the investment committee meeting this morning to recommend the adoption of the alternative asset allocation. So column C provides the results of the capital assumption model created by Cowen that again reflects that alternative asset allocation. So in column C, we can see the total expected result is 6.22%, and that is made up, again, of a 2% inflation and a 4.22% real return expectation. So the final right-hand column provides the difference between the current CSRS assumption and the capital market assumptions used by Cowen. Again, they are different models. There are many reasons why they would not match exactly. There's always a range of reasonable expectations. There's also very key here is that the CSRS assumptions are very long-term in nature. They are 30 plus years, whereas Cowen's model is a 10-year forecast. In general, would have a little more volatility in just how rapidly things would change, reflecting the market and current conditions. So when we see the difference total in the assumed rate of return of 0.78%, so 78 basis points, we can see that that is primarily due to the difference in the inflation assumption, and then also about 28 basis points related to the difference in the real return. So when we do look to make changes to the assumed rate of return, changes can come from a change in our assumed real rate of return or changes in our assumed inflation. If we move to page 8, again, this is just recapping that there are many reasons why it would be reasonable to have a range of assumptions. This is not precise. The future is very uncertain. There is a lot of volatility in the markets day to day, even if we're trying to discuss averages and even over long-term periods. There's a lot of volatility involved. And also, it's perfectly reasonable to be making changes in the assumptions over time as we observe more data, as we continue to see trends develop, as expectations change and underlying market conditions change. It is obviously reasonable to be continuing to do this and continuing to monitor this, not just today, but again, next year and for future valuations as well. If we can jump forward to page 10. So we've seen over a pretty sustained period of lowered capital market expectations. And this has come from a lot of sources. And specific to CSRS, this has been reflected in reductions to the investment return assumption that we're discussing today. So a history of those reductions are provided here on page 10, coming down most recently this time last year for the December 31, 2020 valuation, the reduction to the 7%. That is the current assumption. If we move to page 11, this graphic provides the results of a survey of public funds, so peer systems to CSRS, that is conducted by NASRA, the National Association of State Retirement Administrators. Each column represents a period in time when they conducted the survey, so the far left-hand column being December 2011, and then the far right being the most recent as of when we created this was May 2021. The breakdown of what the assumed return was are provided in the first few rows. And then at the bottom, we provide the total systems included in the survey, the median rate. So we can see, again, this trend has been well documented among all public plans, really. The median back in 2011 was just under 8%. And now in May of 2021, this median has been decreasing down to 7%. And then the final row provides the percentage of plans in the survey that were lower than CSRS. So when we look at the most recent results, you'll see that CSRS, which by the way is the highlighted, shows where CSRS fell in at each time during the survey. You'll see that most recently, again, we're at 7%, which matches the current median, but only 22% of plans had something actually below 7%. So you can see that a lot of plans were right at 7%, and you will see that throughout the period, CSRS has been at or below the median, with well under many fewer plans being actually on that more conservative side than CSRS. If we turn to page 12, I'm going to turn it over to the Callan team to explain some of the considerations from their projection models.
Sure. If you turn to page 13, it's just a repeat of what we spoke of this morning. So I guess for the point of summary, I believe everybody was here in the discussion then, so I won't spend too much time here. This just backstops what Chris just said about return expectations. These are all the different asset classes. We just discussed this morning. It's been a gradual, long-term reduction in expected return over time, and it lines up with how you've lowered your expectations for the fund since, 2011, as he was discussing. The rest of these slides we already discussed this morning, so I'll defer to the chair if we wish to discuss the next, 7 or 8 slides any further in this session.
Are there any points that you want to highlight in the context of our discussion on the assumed rate of return?
Yeah, page 18, please. We spoke of this morning, and I'll highlight again. The vote this morning from the investment committee was to adopt the target that says 6.22, which is the bottom chart on this page. And this is looking at the expected the projected range of outcomes over 1, 5, and 10 years, and the chance that you would get the 7% assumed return. And so that little number 43 next to it over 10 years means there's about a 43% chance your return will be 7% or greater. So not quite the median, but it's also not zero. Okay. And then the following slides look at what if you lowered the discount rate by 12 basis points, 12.5 basis points. That's page 19. And the probability goes up a little bit. And if you drop it to 675, then it gets closer to 45. And one other little bit of just simple arithmetic you can look at. We have a little bit of different time horizon than the actuary. So we're looking out over 10 years trying to cover an investment cycle. The actuary, Chris, and his team have to look out 30 plus years for an open active plan. As a result, we have a different inflation assumption. And if you were to take Korn Ferry's inflation assumption and add it to our real return assumption, you get very close to 675. It's just a number worth considering.
Right, so our inflation assumption is 2.0.
Is 2.0, correct.
And the current one for Korn Ferry is 2.5%.
Right. Right.
Okay, thank you. So now I think that's the perfect segue into page 23, where again we can look at the components of the real return and the inflation and how changing those components for the actuarial valuation and for plan funding and for state budget employer contribution rates. The inflation is used both to project the expected investment return as well as to project the future salary growth of the current members. So as salaries increase over time, again, when we do the valuation, everything is trued up as we go. We always receive the up-to-date salary information for individuals. But then your benefit is not based on your salary today. It's based on your salary when you retire. So we project that out as well. So if we were to have a lower inflation expectation, again, seeing that trend toward lower inflation, seeing kind of over the last 20 years, inflation has pretty much consistently been below the 2.5%, actually around that 2%. That would also reduce our expected future growth on salaries. So we would basically be saying that there would be a reduction in the expected value of benefits because we would expect those benefits to be lower if salaries are not growing as quickly, right? The reduced rates of salary increases reduces the value of the benefit because that benefit would not be as large. So what that does for the contribution is it slightly offsets the effect on the contribution. So a reduction in the inflation is reducing the investment return, which creates a increase in the unfunded liability and the employer contributions. But it's also reducing the projected future salary growth, which is reducing the unfunded liability and reducing the employee contribution rates. Now, the net effect is still an increase because the investment returns, as we see kind of every day, are what drive the bus, so to speak. They have a much larger effect on the costs and the cash needs. So if we can move to slide 24. What we did is we set up kind of an array of options that we believe to be within a reasonable range. Again, we want to look at a reasonable range. As we move down toward a lower investment return, it is slightly more conservative. It's slightly more likely to be attained. But again, it is a rather narrow range. We would think that this is reasonable. It would just be slightly more conservative. And what we're doing is in the upper left-hand corner, again, would be the current, which is a 7% investment return assumption and a 2.5% inflation rate. And what we can do is we can be reducing either the inflation or the real return. And in order to look at the changes in the inflation, you would move across the table to the right. Again, since right now the bigger difference is in the inflation, we would think that it would be very reasonable to look at reducing the inflation as kind of the component that would be reducing. So that would move along that upper horizontal. So if we were to reduce the inflation from 2.5% down to 2.4%, what that means is that our assumed real return that we're sitting at right now of the 4.5% would decrease down to a 4.475%. So we'd have a slightly more conservative expectation about an inflationary growth, and then we'd have a slightly more conservative assumption about our real return that we would achieve. Why we are not showing certain scenarios is we do not believe it would be appropriate to lower the inflation rate by any more than the amount that you are lowering the investment return. Because what that would mean, again, since they're components, they're added to each other. If you were, for example, to reduce the inflation from 2.5 down to 2.4, but stay at 7%, you would inherently be saying that you're expecting a higher real return, right? You're expecting more of it to be made up by real return. So we wanted to make sure that the scenarios that we're reviewing are consistent, because again, the trend that we're seeing, the current models, the current capital market assumptions are not that we would expect higher real returns. The trends that we're seeing are lower. So again, we would look to reduce that inflation and in tandem be reducing the total investment return to move toward a slightly more conservative real return assumption as well. If we can move to slide 25. So this is providing some context to help everyone understand the changes that are already happening from the most recent results, the prior results, the current fiscal year that we're in, the December 31, 2020 valuation, and what would happen for this upcoming valuation, the 2021 valuation, to set the contribution rates beginning July 1, 2022. So not related to any potential change in investment return assumption or any other assumptions, two key things happen between the prior valuation that will now be reflected in this upcoming valuation. The first is that the participating employer, Apache, did make an advance payment of $825 million that was received in April of 2021. This is due to a funding agreement that will not affect the employer contribution rates, but certainly affects the unfunded liability. So when we look at the current, most recent unfunded liability and we project that to this upcoming valuation, we will see a reduction related to that advance payment, right? Because that dollar for dollar went into the plan and reduced the unfunded liability. The second is a change in the actuarial cost method that is pursuant to Act 2017-5. And this is changing kind of the underlying method that is used to calculate the accrued liabilities, the unfunded liability, the employer contribution rates that will be effective with this December 31, 2021 valuation. So again, this is legislation that goes back to 2017. It's always been known to us. It's always been included in our projection models, but you will see a disconnect in both the unfunded liability as well as the employer contribution rates related to that change, just moving from last year to this upcoming year, not related to the discussion that we're having today. So if we move to slide 26, the next several, pretty much through the end of the document, provides very similar information, just measuring different effects. So we're measuring the effect on the expected total dollar contributions for that fiscal year beginning July 1, 2022. We're looking at the effect on the employer contribution rates, and then we're looking at the effect on the unfunded liability in dollars, as well as the funded ratio, the percentage funded ratio. So I'll use slide 26 as an introduction. So again, the most recent valuation, so as of December 31, 2020, we had an expected employer contribution for this fiscal year that we're in right now, the fiscal year that began July 1, 2021, of $2.17 billion. So again, what we were discussing on the prior slide, moving from 2.17 billion to 2.20 billion, which is that top left scenario of the current 7% investment return and 2.5% inflation. That is, again, not related to the investment return. That is related to the change in the actuarial cost method and just the addition of time, changes reflecting the recognition of investment gains that have been had. So that's just moving in time. And then as we move down through the chart.
So that's a $30 million increase.
That is correct, yes. So that is what we would expect to see if no changes were made related to the investment return assumption. And then as we move throughout the chart, we can see what the total expected employer contribution would be under the various scenarios. So if we were to reduce the inflation to 2.4%, that would increase to $2.26 billion. So that would be an additional $60 million for a total of about $90 million above what the total dollar contribution amount was for our current fiscal year. When we move to slide 27, so this shows the projected effect of various scenarios for the 6.875 investment return assumption. And again, we would be starting in the current fiscal year and then moving where you can see in the upcoming fiscal year the first difference. And as you can see, and all values are provided in the table below as well, there's not a large difference. The difference stays pretty close and generally follows the same pattern. If we move to slide 28, just to try to not have too many numbers piled on top of each other, this now shows it for the 6.75% assumption. And so you'll see the black color represents the baseline, so no changes, the current 7%. The green is the 6.75% at maintaining the 2.5% inflation, so that would be the most conservative, and which is why you can see the continued highest amount of total contribution dollars in that green scenario. And then the red reflects a reduction down to the 2.3% inflation. The scenario with the 2.4% inflation that's provided in the charts is not included here because it would just fall between the green and the red line. And as you can see, there's not a lot of space there anyway, but it would pretty much be about the midpoint between those two lines. As we move to 29, the next three slides are analogous to what we just covered, except they are the employer contribution rates. So again, without any changes in the assumptions, we're expecting to go from the current aggregate rate of 33.76% to 34.51%. And then the effect of the various scenarios is provided as well. So if we were to lower the inflation to 2.4, we see that would increase to 35.39% expected. So just under 1% of the total funding payroll. Pages 30 and 31, again, are very similar, just again focused on the employer contribution rate as opposed to the total dollars. And you will see, again, the very similar pattern. The key here now looking at the rate is when you look at dollars, total dollar amount in 2040 is not the same as a total dollar amount in 2020 because there will be some inflation, whether it's 2% or 2.5% or 1%. The time value of money, dollars will continue to increase, or at least we're expecting that they will continue to increase. Whereas the rate would not have that inflationary component. We would be looking more apples to apples over time. And under all of these scenarios, we are looking at, again, after we move past the change in the actuarial cost method that is happening for December 31, 2021, irregardless of the investment return assumption. After that, we are expecting to see a steady reduction in the employer contribution rate over time. So if they maintain the current levels, the plan would be expected to be continued to be funding. There's no kind of backloading where we're expecting to have higher contribution rates in the future, right? We're expecting that to be trending downward. As we move forward to slide 32, again, we're presenting all of the same information, and now we've shifted to the unfunded liability. So the most recent valuation, the total unfunded liability of $22.4 billion is expected to decrease down to 17.22. And this was the big reason why we wanted to include that slide about the context of moving from the last valuation to this valuation. There's a substantial reduction in the unfunded liability related to the actuarial cost method, as well as the advance payment received by PASHE. So we can see, again, with no changes in the assumptions, the total unfunded liability would be projected to be $17.22 billion. And again, if we were to reduce the inflation to 2.4%, then that would increase to 17.91. So about 700 million, just shy of 700 million. Again, on slides 33 and 34, we can see, again, very important to this discussion. Under any of these scenarios, the total unfunded liability as well as the funded ratio, which we'll get to, are projected to be improving. So reducing unfunded liability, a increasing funded ratio over time under any of these scenarios. And then slides 35 through 37 provide, again, the same information focused on the funded ratio. So again, some good news is that we are expecting the funded ratio to increase, especially related to the change in the actuarial cost method from 59.4%, and we can move forward to slide 35. We'll increase the funded ratio from 59.4% to 67.2%. A very strong increase. Again, it's something that we had always been building into our projections. We knew that this cost method change was happening. And then if we were to lower the inflation assumption to 2.4%, then the funded ratio would decline slightly from 67.2% down to 66.3%. So about 1% reduction in the funded ratio. So again, all of these are available for review and discussion, and we've about reached the time to open up to any questions or discussions. Slide 39 provides a summary just about the recommendation to be made by the committee. So on slide 39, we've labeled these different options in the chart, options A through F. They're just given in order. Option A being the current no change. And what we're showing here is the employer contribution rate. But we can always flip back to the projected effects. We can look at the total unfunded liability. And again, the current aggregate rate for the fiscal year we're in right now is 33.76. And then the chart provides the expected aggregate rate for each scenario.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Greg.
Thank you, Mary. When I look at the charts on 27 and 28 as to the impact on the employer contribution for the potential changes in the assumptions, am I correct that, say, for instance, on page 27, the cost to the employer from going from 7 to 6.875 is $90 million, going from 2.2 billion to 2.29 billion?
Yes, if we maintain the 2.5% inflation and we only make that reduction, so basically we take out 0.125% from the expected real return, and we maintain the 2.5 inflation, then that is correct. That would increase the total budget amount by about $90 million.
And similarly, for going to 6 3/4, it's like 170 million.
Compared to the current assumption, yes.
So do you have any calculations as to what the cumulative cost of those increases are over the 20-year period? I mean, it's a significant increase for the employers.
Yes, and I think Craig can pull some of that information quickly as we discuss. But yes, we could certainly provide kind of a rule of thumb for each, say, 25 basis point reduction. In general, we look at kind of around that 150, 170 million. And if Craig's able to pull that up, if he either has that now or can look at that while we continue our discussions.
Okay.
For the rule of thumb.
Okay, thank you.
So the adjustment that was made in how we calculate our unfunded liability, that's just a one-time change in the numbers? I'm looking at the various charts, and I see between 21 and 22.
Yes, so it will forever affect the numbers because we will continue to use that new method, but the kind of when you will see the delta will be in that first year when we change. And in general, it is a difference in how the liabilities are allocated between service that was already performed and future service that will be performed by employees, which is why you see a increase in the funded ratio. So basically a decrease in the unfunded liability. More is allocated toward future normal costs and less is allocated to the past service that was already accrued. And it is a good change. We like the change. It is a more common method that is being used under the new method. Our belief is that many other times that we look at the effects of certain things, the results will be more intuitive under this method. So when we get a couple years from now and we consider the effects of certain things like we did a couple years ago, we believe that the results that you see will be more intuitive under this new method.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
So in the interest of time, and we can certainly follow up if we have anything different, but about $150 million per year for the 25 basis points. So to go all the way from 7 down to 675 would be about $150 million a year, times basically the 30-year funding that we use for paying off changes in the unfunded liability. That would be about 4.5. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So about 4.5 billion over the 30-year period. Yes.
That's an additional cost for the employer.
That would be, yes, that would be the expected additional cost. Now, again, the total cost will be dictated by what actually happens over time, because again, it will always be trued up. There will always be gains and losses. Every year we will have more or less investment returns than we expected. So again, the overall cost of the benefits will be based on the benefits themselves and how long they're being paid for. And
the smoothing and all that stuff affects the rate also.
Yes, but the ultimate cost is based on what actually happens.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah,
Representative
thank you.
Schimmel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just so that I'm clear, it's actually not an additional cost. What we're doing is we're paying forward the costs, which actually eliminates greater costs later. If we don't make the change to, in this case, 6 3/4 today, we're just paying additional monies later that always will catch up with us. So in my mind, I see this as it's not adding to the unfunded liability. It's actually just sort of further unmasking what the unfunded liability genuinely is. And I think it also prevents us from taking riskier making riskier investment choices now to hit a target that we seldom hit, if I'm right.
So the cost of the plan will be determined by what actually happens. This, again, is contributions. So it's specifically the pattern of contributions, which we, again, seek to make relatively stable, relatively predictable, so that we're ensuring that they are met over time and so that there will be assets available to pay benefits when due. Again, under these scenarios, the pattern of contributions are relatively stable, relatively predictable, and we're not under any of these scenarios expecting to see any increases. So we're not expecting that in the future there would need to be a higher rate of contributions compared to where they are now. So it's not like it's any sort of backloading or pushing anything later to be paid. But yes, in general, the more you would put in now, the less would need to go in the future. But again, it's about that pattern of that contributions. The ultimate cost of the plan will be based on the actual investment performance.
But the funds that come in, I mean, when the plan was set up, there was 3 basic sources of funding. The employee makes their contribution, the employer makes their contribution, but the bulk of the funds come from the investment earnings that we, as a pension board, are responsible for. I mean, I don't know how we compare to other states, but right now, our employer contribution rate, and I want to emphasize, this is a percentage of payroll. So for every dollar that a person earns who works for the state of Pennsylvania, we're paying an additional 34.5% for the pension plans. And that's for a lot of different reasons, but that's where we are today. And that's more than $2 billion a year that comes in through the pension. So the changes, by changing the assumed rate of return going forward, we tweak the employer contribution rate and we bring in to the fund through employer contributions maybe another 100 million, maybe 30 million if we do nothing, another 100 million, 90 million, depending on what rate we would go with. But compared to the investment earnings, it's actually a relatively small piece of the source of funding for the entire operation. So anyway, so with that, any more questions? Mr. Bloom?
What was the, I hope I get my terminology correct, assumed rate of return last year? We just went to 622.
Well, there are 2 different things. Sorry, excuse me. On the investment side, our projected return a year ago was close to 7.
665,
yeah. And we're showing you, but the assumed rate of return is a different concept. You're using 7 last year. You moved from.
Okay, all right. Then the investment assumptions.
Yeah.
What was that last year?
I believe it was 665.
Okay.
Modeling for this period when we did this last year.
Right.
Same time.
Right. Yes. Right.
So we're looking at making a decision based on a 30-year projection, not the 10-year projection. And we're, and at the present time, we're really at the conservative end of our peer group at 7%. And so, trying to, looking at a 30-year projection, looking at where we are among our peer groups, I mean, is it prudent to maintain 7% assumed rate of return, as opposed to what we were looking at on a 10-year?
Korn Ferry believes all of these scenarios to be reasonable, including maintaining 7%. Again, as we spoke about there can be more volatility in the year-to-year changes in capital market expectations that they're performing compared to this, which again is a budgeting tool where we want it to be relatively stable. For example, in this climate, if we are seeing kind of high inflation, which recently we have, very recently, if there was a increase in the inflation next year for the Callan models, that would increase, generally, all things being equal, not that they are, their numbers. Whereas in the current climate and trends and long-term trends that we're seeing, we would probably be unlikely to increase our investment return assumption next year, right? Even if that 622 number came back up to 665 or some change happened, we would unlikely do that same thing. We would not go down to 622, have a much higher, for 1 year, much higher contribution amount, and then bring it back down. Again, we want to observe that pattern over time. So again, if we get a year from now and we continue to see the same observable data, the same market conditions, maybe we continue that same trend. But again, we would not likely, for that stability, you would not want to have such a decrease like the 665 down to 622 and then be coming back up all the way or half the way, or as you can see, even 10 or 12 basis points has a pretty substantial dollar impact. Which again, if you change and change back, it's just that 1 year. It's just increasing the volatility of the budget amount. It's not nearly as was pointed out. It's not nearly as big of a 1 year volatility impact of the investment return itself. $100 million difference in the investment return is a very small difference in investment return. $100 million of contribution is very large.
Jim Bloom?
Yes, we've, Representative Franco, we've been aggressive, as I'm sure you remember, in getting these down. We went from 7 1/4 to 7 1/8, and then last year we went from 7 1/8 to 7. And I'm not sure that we necessarily have to go to 6 7/8 this year. There's always next year if things look different. And I think we're comfortable at 7 right now, but we certainly will not want to be the only one on the committee that felt that way.
We have the benefit of looking across maybe 100 or so big public funds, and this data that's on page 11 that shows the NASRA data is very valuable to look at what everyone's doing. It tends to lag considerations. And I can tell you right now, the considerations are to be below 7, pretty much across the board with every one of our clients. So they're all having the same discussion you're having now. It won't show up in this data for another year or two. So you're not as far ahead of the curve as that's the wrong term. You're not way more conservative than anybody else in their consideration. And a lot of feeding into that is not just us, but all of our peers who have to do this type of analysis have, very sobering expectations for the capital markets.
So what's the effect of this lowering it on the employees coming out of their paycheck?
There would be no expected effect. And again, we're not seeing any current expected effect related to the size of these changes. The upcoming measurements would then be, each year would be measured against what this assumption is. So again, it would be the more conservative investment return assumption would be more likely to be attained, and therefore would be less likely overall for the shared risk to be triggered, and more likely for shared gain provisions to be triggered.
What triggers that share risk? I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, oversimplifying, if in the long run the investment returns differ from the assumed rate of return by more than 1%, either they're more than 1% below or more than 1% above, then the numbers change. Now it's a more complicated formula than that, but there's a band, and right now I believe our actual returns are to the good on the assumption over the last 9-year period. We're tested in 2 more years at the end of 2022. So that's the situation there.
But, excuse me,
Yeah. Right.
so if we assume 7%, but we routinely come in at 6%, that's what would trigger the employees having to pay more?
Yes. Shared risk is triggered by us missing the assumption. There are 4, 5 different benefits that are affected by the assumed rate of return or the actual returns, some of which they don't all go in the same direction. Some are in favor of the employees, some are against the employees. Theoretically, this should be a mutual decision that the impact on the employees directly is not the relevant factor. The relevant factor is what we think is actually going to happen. But in line with what Chris was saying about the steadiness for the employee contributions, if every time we change the assumed rate of return, we are functionally changing the benefits, either up or down, and differently for different. So employees might want to know that there is some stability in the benefits. So that is also something to take into account. Again, you shouldn't make the decision. You shouldn't say, oh, we're going to have the assumed rate of return be low so we don't trigger shared risk. We actually had some litigation on that topic a number of years ago, and that claim was made. And Jim and his predecessors and the actuaries testified, and they were able to show that our process was good. We were going through the process like this, and the board actually withstood that challenge. But we were challenged that, the assumption was picked to affect the benefit, and we were able to show that was not the reason.
And again, do keep in mind that having a more conservative investment return assumption may reduce the likelihood that employee contributions would decrease, but it would increase the likelihood that employee contributions would increase. Because again, you now have a lower, and it's still that 100 basis points. So if you were beating it, right, it would have this shared gain. So, if it were lower, it would be more.
Yes, Chris is right. There is the paradoxical impact that a lower contribution rate assumption raises employer contributions and decreases employee contributions, because you're increasing the unfunded liability. Employer contributions go up, but employee contributions could go down because you have a better chance of meeting those and beating them.
I got another question. Sure. Yeah, just so with the Penn State advance payment and the PASHE advance payment, what rate were they projected at? Was that 7 1/8 and 7, or on their advance payment?
That is correct. The Penn State agreement was projected 7 1/8, and the PASHE agreement was projected at 7.
So this is, from their perspective, they're doing better. I'm sorry?
Well, they're still, for that transaction, but they're still participating employers in this plan. Mm-hmm. And as these costs increase, they also will pay their proportionate share of that. So as in general costs increase, their costs are increasing as well for that. That did not remove them as contributing employers.
Right. But from their financial analysis, from their side, it's...
And from the surge perspective is also, again, and for the fund as a whole, it will be about what is actually attained on those assets.
Right.
So it'll be, over the last year or year and a half, if we were outperforming the 7 or 7 1/8 versus if that was not being met.
Right. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay.
If you don't mind, I do want to circle back to one question that was not addressed, and that was a question related to how often this is met. We did show in the June meeting that we met more often than not over the last 3, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. We met or exceeded the investment return. But again, that's not the only consideration. The consideration is the volatility. The consideration is that overall pattern of funding. Yes, and again, on an individual year-by-year basis, the fund met it more often than not. It exceeded the assumed return more often than not.
Over the last 20 years, we were slightly over 7%. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I don't know if we're getting a little bit more information here. Okay. All right. So our actuary has laid out some 3 reasonable assumptions that they are, or not just 3, actually 6. I would like to make the case for not making a change this year. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we have lowered the rate twice in the last 2 years. Proud of the fact that, 12 years ago we were at 8.5%, so we've been gradually bringing it down. Looking at our peer plans, and knowing that the data that we're looking at is already out of date, but certainly there's only 22% of the plans that are lower than us as of the date of the data that we're having. I was looking at the information that Jim Nolan had sent us, and Representative Frankel was just alluding to some of that. In the last 3 years, we've had some very good years, and it's been 10.76%, our investment earnings. Over the last 10 years, 8.21% on average over the last 10 years. And then when you take it out 20 years, it's 7.02%. I think that our investment office has been going through a lot of transition, but they have been leading us in trying to reduce our risks and our costs while bringing in good returns and maintaining sufficient liquidity in case there would be a situation where we would be called on to have to provide cash for sufficient benefits over a number of years. I mean, we're up to 9 years. I personally can't imagine a situation like that, but there's a lot of things I can't imagine. Anyway, given that we are in a period of transition with new leadership in the investment office, just this morning we we actually voted on a new alternative to the asset allocation. I would propose staying where we are and holding off until next year. So,
I concur.
Any thoughts?
I concur. I think looking at the whole scope of things, and it was a great presentation, by the way, with the history of what we've got going on at this point in time. I agree with the chair.
It's it seems like we're, in the end, it's all about tweaking, and this is a 30-year projection. And we've done some tweaking over the last couple of years, and I suspect we'll do some tweaking over the next couple of years, but so that's where I am.
Chairwoman, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I just want to thank you for your leadership reducing those assumed rates the last 2 years. I also thank you for your presentation, because being a new board member, it was particularly helpful. And I think with the new asset allocation, this seems prudent to me.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was more, I just wanted to throw it out there.
You could. They could. They don't have
Okay.
to.
Well, she's got it there.
Yeah.
Let me find the wording.
I think if you want to move, if you want to stay where you are, it doesn't necessarily need a motion if you don't want to change. But if you want to do it to, if you want to memorialize, there you go. You're good either way.
A motion is in order to recommend that the State Employees Retirement Board leave unchanged the current annual assumed rate of investment return and to leave unchanged the current annual assumed rate of inflation, and thus, 3, adopt an annual assumed rate of investment return of 7% compounded annually and an annual assumed rate of inflation of 2.5% compounded annually, with both assumptions to be effective December 31st, 2021, with the December 31st, 2021 actuarial valuation, and remain in effect until further action by the board.
So moved?
Okay. May we have a roll call or any discussion? And now that I'm reading this, I'm wondering if there is a need, if we're not changing anything.
There isn't, but if you want to go ahead and memorialize it, that's completely your call.
Okay.
But no action means you stay where you are.
All right.
Do you want me to do a roll call vote?
Do you have a second?
Yeah. Time final.
Yes, roll call vote.
Oh, gotcha.
Senator DeSanto? Oh, okay.
Yeah. As Jeff, since you do want to perhaps make a recommendation to the board to that effect, it might, again, memorialize it to say, if you want to recommend to the board that there is no change, this would be a good way to do it.
Okay.
So you're on the right track. Keep going.
Right. Good point.
Do I need to change the resolution?
No, you do not. You do not. You're good.
Okay.
I had 3 good options for you there. We're good. Try to cover all the bases.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator DeSanto.
Aye.
Chairman Philman.
Aye.
Representative Frankel. Committee Chair Soderberg.
Aye.
And Mr. Bloom on behalf of Secretary Veg.
Aye.
Okay. 5 ayes. So the motion
The
passes.
motion passes. Thank you very much. I don't know if we need to get with legal to find out what happens at the board level if all right. Okay. All right. The next order of business, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah McSurdy for an Office of Financial Management update.
Thank you, Mary. In the essence of time, I'm going to just give a brief highlight of our Office of Financial Management update. If you could, before I get started, I just wanted to say it's good to see everybody in person today instead of on the Teams meeting. So if you can go to slide 3. The first item that I want to cover is, since our last meeting in June, the Office of Financial Management has worked with other SERS staff to finalize our 2020 annual comprehensive financial report. And this report is posted on our website. It was completed by our due date of June 30th, 2021. This report contains a lot of valuable financial, investment, statistical, and actuarial information for our stakeholders. One other report that we finalized was our GASB 68 report. This is a standard that's called Accounting and Financial Reporting for Pensions. This report is prepared and given to all of our employers that are in the defined benefit plan. The report contains those employers' proportionate share of the unfunded net or the net pension liability, the pension expense, deferred inflows and outflows, and other background information on our plan that they use to prepare their financial statements. And this report is audited by KPMG. So if you go to the next slide. I know it seems like it's a little bit early, but we have started to kick off our fiscal year 22-23 budget process, and we'll be bringing that to the committee at the September meeting, and the budget usually gets submitted to the governor's budget office in the beginning of October. So if you go to the next slide, starting on slide 5, and then for the next 3 slides, I'll just give brief highlights of the statement of changes in fiduciary net position for our 3 plans: the defined benefit plan, defined contribution plan, and deferred compensation plan. Starting with the defined benefit plan on this slide, if you could look at the second line from the top, on the year-to-date column, you can see that our employer contributions into the plan on a year-to-date basis were approximately $1.5 billion. This amount includes the $825 million lump sum payment from PASHE in relation to their unfunded liability. We received that payment at the end of April. Not too far behind that amount, we had pretty good net investment income on a year-to-date basis at $1.4 billion. When you go down to the deductions, you can see we had $1.2 billion paid out of the plan for benefit payments and refunds. And overall net, the additions outweighed the deductions from the plan, and we added approximately $1.8 billion to the plan, ending the month at approximately $36.9 billion. If you can go to the next slide. So for the defined contribution plan, you can see at the top of the statements, the plan continues to grow in its 3rd year. Employers are paying into the plan, and participants continue to pay in both through payroll and also rollovers into the plan. And they continue to make money on their investments through the net investment income. The additions into the plan also outweighed the deductions from the plan, and we added approximately $11.5 million and ended the month at $52 million at the end of April. If you go to the next slide. Last, we continue with our voluntary deferred comp plan, but the positive trend continues. On the top half of the statement, you can see that on the year-to-date column, we had participant contributions of approximately $58.6 million. 59 million. Sorry about that. My vision's failing me here. Plan transfers in of approximately $22.4 million. And then net investment income on those contributions and plan balances of $248 million. We paid benefits and refunds out of the plan, and we had plan transfers out. So the total additions and outweighed the total deductions for a net change in the plan of increase of $235 million, and the plan ended the month at approximately $4.6 billion. So that's it for the Office of Financial Management update. Are there any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Next on the agenda is the charter for the Finance and Member Services Committee, and I believe Chris Houston is going.
No, I'm going to cover that.
You're going to cover. Okay, my mistake. Sorry.
So this is under Board Doc 6A. Chris already did cover this in the investment committee, so I'm going to try to just give some highlights here because he did already do a good job. But on Board Docs, there's a memo, a red line version of the committee charter, and a clean version of the committee charter. If you remember, in February 2021, the Finance Committee recommended the board to make amendments to the charter, subject to the Board Governance and Personnel Committee concurrence, but nothing has happened on that front yet. And then at the June 2021 meeting, the board took action to accept the Defined Contribution Plan Committee, the recommendation to eliminate the committee upon the board approval of amendments to both the Finance and Member Services Committee Charter and the Investment Committee Charter. and approval by the Board Governance and Personnel Committee, and then also amending the bylaws. So the red line version of the committee charter is filed on Board Docs, and it includes all of the original amendments that we talked about in February. An additional amendment that covers the recommendation and retention of an actuary, that's in item C1. And then it also includes additional changes that we made to the charter to take over responsibilities from the Defined Contribution Committee. I'm not going to cover each one of them, but the one item I do want to note is that the committee name is going to change from Finance Member Services to Finance and Member and Participant Services. And this was made to show the evolution of the committee's responsibilities over time and the expanding duties taken over from the Defined Contribution Committee. Including the word participant reflects the important work that's taking place on behalf of both the members in the defined benefit plan and the participants in the defined contribution plan and the deferred compensation plan. It also reflects the critical nature of CSR's expanding relationship with our third-party administrator. Joe, do you have anything to add?
No, so just that the inclusion of participants, it's really a reflection of the growth of the new plans and the resources that we're really throwing at those people, and we're throwing the house at them and trying to bring everybody up to speed. We're a straight defined benefit plan for almost 100 years, and I think the agency is evolving very quickly to meet the needs of those individuals.
If the committee would like to move forward, we would ask that the motions from February be rescinded and then new motions be made to move forward with all of the amendments that I just highlighted. The Board Governance and Personnel Committee will be discussing charter amendments at their upcoming meeting this afternoon, and then the board is anticipated to move forward with any action at its September meeting. So Mary, if you would like to move forward with the motions.
A motion is in order for the Finance and Member Services Committee to rescind the action taken by the committee on February 23rd, 2021, to recommend, 1, to the State Employees Retirement Board that it approve amendments to the Finance and Member Services Committee Charter in the form as attached to the resolution after receiving input from the Board Governance and Personnel Committee, and 2, to the Board Governance and Personnel Committee that it concur with this committee's recommendation and so inform the State Employees Retirement Board.
So moved.
May I have a second? All those, roll call, please.
Senator DeSanto?
Aye.
Chairman Philman?
Aye.
Representative Frankel? Aye. Chair Soderberg?
Aye.
And Mr. Bloom?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you very much. The next motion deals with the committee charter amendment. A motion is in order for the Finance and Member Services Committee to recommend, number 1, to the State Employees Retirement Board that it approve the amendments to the Finance and Member Services Committee charter as set forth in the attached after receiving input from the Board, Governance and Personnel Committee, and 2, to the Board Governance and Personnel Committee that it concur with this committee's recommendation and so inform the State Employees Retirement Board.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Roll call?
Senator DeSanto?
Aye.
Chairman Philman?
Aye.
Representative Frankel? Committee Chair Soderberg?
Aye.
And Mr. Bloom?
Aye.
Okay. 5 ayes.
All right, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item on the agenda is with Joe Torta. He's going to give us an update on the actuarial services contract that we've been working on for 6 months or more now.
Yeah, at least. Thank you, Madam Chair. And considering the status of the contract, my comments will be very brief today. The new contract for CSR's actuarial service provider has been awarded to Korn Ferry. I'm pleased to report that CSRS and Korn Ferry have finalized the terms of a new 5-year agreement. In order to allow for the proper Commonwealth approvals of the new contract, CSRS extended its current contract with Korn Ferry until the new contract goes into effect upon the Office of Attorney General's approval, which is expected to occur by mid-August. And I want to thank the board members and designees that participated in that process. It was very thorough. Are there any questions from anybody regarding that selection?
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
All right, there's some informational items that are available in board docs for your review. Any comments, concerns, questions to raise? Okay, may we have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
All those in favor say aye. We are adjourned.
Really?
The next committee meeting will be on September 28th or 29th in 2021. Thank you.